you ever walked into a room and felt like every single pair of eyes was on you? Maybe you spilled coffee on your shirt, your hair isn't cooperating, or you said something awkward in a conversation, and suddenly you feel like the entire world noticed. That creeping feeling of being judged or observed by everyone around you is so common that psychologists have a name for it. It's called the spotlight effect. And it's one of the most fascinating quirks of human psychology because it reveals just how much our own perception of reality is filtered through the lens of self-consciousness. The spotlight effect is our tendency to overestimate how much other people notice us, our appearance, and our actions. It's as if we're standing on a brightly lit stage in our own minds, and everyone else is in the audience watching. But here's the reality. Most people are so busy thinking about themselves, their own problems, and how they're being perceived that they rarely pay as much attention to us as we think they do. This psychological phenomenon isn't just a passing feeling. It's deeply rooted in how our brains are wired to focus on ourselves as the center of our own story. Think about it. From the moment you wake up, your thoughts revolve around you. What you'll wear, how you'll handle your day, whether you're running late. That's not selfishness. That's just how consciousness works. You're the protagonist in your own life. Because of this, it's easy to assume that other people view us with the same level of scrutiny that we place on ourselves. The truth is, they don't. But because we're so hyper-aware of our own choices, flaws and mistakes, we project that awareness onto others, imagining they're observing us just as intensely. Psychologists Thomas Gilovich and Kenneth Savitsky studied this effect in the late 1990s, and their research revealed something fascinating. In one of their most famous experiments, they asked college students to wear an embarrassing t-shirt featuring a well-known celebrity. The students were then asked to predict how many of their peers would notice the shirt. They were convinced that almost half the people would take note, but in reality, only about a quarter of the people in the room even remembered seeing the shirt. This gap between perception and reality illustrates the spotlight effect perfectly. We feel like a glaring spotlight is on us when, in truth, most people barely notice. This tendency has a lot to do with how we process information. Our brains naturally focus inward first. It's part of being human. We live in a mental narrative where everything happens around us, so our own flaws and mistakes feel magnified. This is called egocentrism, not in the sense of being selfish or arrogant, but in the sense that our perception of the world is organized with ourselves at the center. We assume that what's obvious to us is equally obvious to others, even though that's rarely the case. The spotlight effect doesn't just show up in awkward social moments. It affects decisions we make every day. People hesitate to ask questions in meetings because they fear they'll sound stupid, when in reality, most others are relieved someone spoke up. We avoid wearing bold outfits because we assume everyone will judge us, even though most people are too preoccupied with their own insecurities to even notice. It can even stop us from pursuing opportunities, like speaking up in class, performing on stage, or approaching someone we admire, simply because we feel like all eyes will be on us if we fail. Interestingly, this bias isn't exclusive to moments of embarrassment or insecurity. It also affects our perception of success. When we accomplish something, we often believe others are more aware of our achievements than they actually are. You might win an award at work and feel like everyone is thinking about it as much as you are. But just like embarrassment, that awareness is mostly in your head. The spotlight effect cuts both ways. It exaggerates our failures and our triumphs in the minds of others, when in reality, most people simply don't notice or remember as much as we assume. This idea might sound discouraging at first, realizing that people don't pay as much attention to us as we think, but it's actually freeing once you internalize it. The truth is, most people are too busy managing their own worries, insecurities, and goals to dedicate mental energy to analyzing your every move. Think back to times you've noticed someone else's mistake, like someone tripping on the sidewalk or having a stain on their shirt. You probably noticed, maybe chuckled to yourself, and then moved on with your day. Yet when you're the one who makes the mistake, you feel like it's etched into everyone's memory forever. That's the distortion of the spotlight effect at work. There's also a strong link between the spotlight effect and social anxiety. When you feel anxious in social settings, your attention becomes hyper-focused on yourself, your heartbeat, your tone of voice, the way your hands move. You start imagining others are dissecting your every word and expression. In reality, most people are thinking the same thing about themselves, not you. This internal focus magnifies small things you do, making them feel huge and obvious, even though no one else notices. It's like being trapped in your own psychological echo chamber, where your inner critic is the loudest voice. What's fascinating is that this isn't necessarily a flaw in our thinking. It's part of a natural cognitive bias. Humans evolved to care about how others perceive us because social acceptance was a matter of survival. Thousands of years ago, being excluded from a group could mean losing access to resources or protection. So our brains developed a strong sensitivity to social judgment. While that instinct is helpful in keeping us connected, it also exaggerates our self-awareness to the point where we think people notice more than they actually do. Evolution has essentially hardwired us to overestimate how visible we are to others. Understanding the spotlight effect can also change how we interpret embarrassment. Have you ever replayed a moment in your head over and over again, like saying the wrong thing or forgetting someone's name, and felt like it defined you in the eyes of everyone who witnessed it? The spotlight effect shows that those moments are rarely as significant to others as they are to you. People forget, they move on, and often they didn't notice in the first place. Realizing this can help break the cycle of rumination and self-criticism that keeps many people stuck in social fear. Another interesting angle to consider is how the spotlight effect interacts with social media. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube amplify the sense that people are watching us. When we share something online, we often imagine a huge audience analyzing every detail of our photos, captions, and videos. While social media has indeed increased visibility, the psychological tendency to overestimate how many people are scrutinizing us has been around long before these platforms existed. Social media just gives the spotlight effect a modern stage, making it even more important to be aware of this bias. One of the reasons the spotlight effect feels so real is because of how vividly we remember our own actions compared to how we process other people's. When you spill water in front of a group, the embarrassment burns into your memory. Your heart races, your face flushes, and your inner voice screams, "Everyone saw that!" But for the people around you, it's just a fleeting blip in their day. They might not even register it, or if they do, it's quickly replaced by their own thoughts. Our brain magnifies these moments because they're emotionally charged. But this exaggeration tricks us into thinking the event mattered as much to others as it did to us. Psychologists describe this as a form of egocentric bias. Because we're so deeply immersed in our own mental world, we have a hard time accurately seeing ourselves through the eyes of others. This bias isn't just about embarrassment. It also influences how we perceive success, relationships, and even fashion choices. For example, you might spend hours agonizing over an outfit, worried about what others will think. But once you arrive at an event, you'll notice that most people are too busy adjusting their own clothes or worrying about their own appearance to focus on yours. That's egocentric bias in action. Everyone is caught up in their own self-consciousness. Research shows that even highly confident people aren't immune to this effect. The difference is that confident individuals have learned to question these feelings instead of accepting them as truth. When they feel self-conscious, they remind themselves that others aren't paying as much attention as they fear. This shift in perspective doesn't come naturally. It's something that can be trained over time by understanding the psychology behind these feelings. Interestingly, the spotlight effect isn't just a social quirk. It also impacts decision-making. Many people avoid public speaking, not because they're bad at it, but because the spotlight effect convinces them everyone is judging their every word, every pause, every nervous gesture. In reality, audiences are usually rooting for the speaker. They're often distracted, tired, or focused on how the information applies to them, not on picking apart the speaker's flaws. Once you realize this, public speaking becomes much less intimidating because you see your fear as a mental exaggeration, not a reflection of reality. Another classic example of the spotlight effect happens in classrooms. A student hesitates to raise their hand, thinking their question is stupid, or that everyone will remember their mistake. But often, other students have the same question and are relieved someone else asked. The fear is created by the spotlight effect, which makes you feel like all attention will lock on you the moment you speak. Teachers and professors see this all the time. Students overestimate how closely others are paying attention. In reality, everyone else is absorbed in their own thoughts, grades and worries, just like you. This phenomenon even affects how we remember social interactions. Think about an awkward moment from your past, a bad joke you made, an embarrassing stumble, or a comment you regret. Chances are you remember it vividly and cringe when it pops into your mind. You might imagine that the other people present remember it just as clearly, but they probably don't. They have their own collection of embarrassing moments they replay in their heads. The spotlight effect makes us the star of our own mental movie, but in other people's stories, we're often just a passing character. Our culture also plays a role in amplifying this effect. In societies that value individualism, like the United States, people are raised to see themselves as unique individuals. While this has benefits, it also reinforces the belief that others are constantly noticing us. Social media adds another layer to this. Posting a picture can feel like stepping on stage, leading us to imagine an invisible audience carefully analyzing everything we share. But in reality, most people scroll quickly, double tap, and move on without giving it much thought. The spotlight effect has been around for centuries, but platforms like Instagram and TikTok make it easier for these feelings to intensify. The good news is that understanding the spotlight effect can help you change your mindset. Simply knowing that this bias exists makes it easier to challenge your thoughts. Next time you feel embarrassed, pause and remind yourself, this is the spotlight effect talking. Most people won't notice or remember. Over time, you can even use this realization to push yourself out of your comfort zone. Wearing something bold, trying something new, or speaking up in a meeting becomes less intimidating when you realize you're not under constant surveillance. One way psychologists recommend overcoming the spotlight effect is by shifting your attention outward. Instead of focusing on yourself, try genuinely paying attention to other people. Listen closely to what they're saying. Notice their body language and ask questions. This not only reduces your self-consciousness, but also helps you connect better with others. When your focus is on understanding someone else, the feeling of being under a spotlight fades because your brain is no longer fixated on you. Another helpful strategy is perspective taking. Try to imagine how much you actually notice about others in your day-to-day life. When a colleague makes a small mistake, do you dwell on it for hours? Probably not. You likely move on quickly. Realizing that others treat your slip-ups the same way can make you more comfortable in your own skin. It's freeing to accept that most people are too wrapped up in their own worries to focus on yours. The spotlight effect can also teach us empathy. Once you understand that everyone feels this way, you start to see that others aren't judging you as harshly as you imagine. In fact, they're probably feeling just as self-conscious. That person you think is critiquing your presentation might be too worried about their own performance to even notice your mistakes. This awareness creates a more compassionate view of social interactions because it reminds us that we're all navigating similar insecurities. Imagine this. You're walking into a crowded cafe. You trip slightly over the edge of a rug, catch yourself, and your heart starts pounding. You feel your face flush as you quickly glance around the room. In your head, you're certain that everyone saw you, that they're laughing or whispering about your clumsiness. But what's actually happening? The person at the counter is scrolling through their phone, the couple in the corner is deep in conversation, and the barista is too busy making drinks to notice. For them, that moment barely registered, if at all. Yet for you, it feels like the world stopped. That's the spotlight effect in action. Your mind takes a tiny, forgettable event and turns it into a headline on an imaginary stage, where you're the main character. This effect can make life feel heavier than it needs to. It can hold you back from speaking up in meetings, trying new things, or expressing yourself authentically. But here's the truth. That's easy to forget. Everyone else is just as wrapped up in their own world as you are in yours. The same way you're worrying about how you look, what you said, or how you acted, they're doing the exact same thing. Realizing this creates a sense of freedom. Your mistakes don't define you in anyone's mind but your own. One powerful way to break free from this mental trap is to deliberately test it. Next time you feel self-conscious, ask yourself, if someone else did this, would I remember it tomorrow? Most likely, the answer is no. People are busy, distracted, and focused on themselves. And that's not a bad thing, it's just human nature. In fact, this realization can help you become bolder. Once you understand that the spotlight effect is mostly an illusion, it becomes easier to take risks, laugh at yourself, and stop replaying moments that no one else is even thinking about. Another helpful shift is to focus on contribution instead of perception. Instead of worrying about how you look or sound, think about what value you can add to the moment. When giving a presentation, focus on sharing your message clearly, rather than impressing your audience. When meeting new people, focus on learning about them, rather than obsessing over what they think of you. This outward focus not only eases your anxiety, but also makes you more engaging and approachable because your energy isn't tied up in self-consciousness. The spotlight effect is a universal experience. Everyone feels it at some point, even the most confident people. Confidence doesn't come from eliminating self-awareness. It comes from recognizing that this bias exists and learning to move forward anyway. When you internalize this truth, life becomes lighter. You'll stop holding yourself back because of imagined judgments and start stepping into opportunities with a clearer mind. So the next time you feel like all eyes are on you, take a deep breath and remember this. The spotlight is mostly in your head. People aren't dissecting your every move. They're living in their own stories, just like you. And that's actually a beautiful thing because it means you're free. Free to try, to fail, to succeed, and to be yourself without the crushing weight of imagined judgment. The spotlight effect will always whisper in the background, but once you see it for what it is, it loses its power.